Chosen one, listen with stillness. There is a kind of understanding that cannot be rushed, a form of knowing that does not arrive by force, and a spiritual awareness that unfolds only when the mind is steady and the internal noise settles into silence. You are not here to react. You are here to perceive. You are here to sit inside your own consciousness and allow truth to reveal itself without agitation, without urgency, and without emotional turbulence. The topic before you is not about gossip, nor about drama, nor about ego. It is about the psychology of spiritual separation, the subtle, unspoken tension that arises when one soul evolves and the people around them remain unchanged. Chosen one, when individuals speak behind your back, when private conversations center around your growth, your silence, and your transformation, it is not merely human behavior. It is a spiritual measurement. It marks the distance between consciousness levels. It reveals who is threatened by inner work and who is awakened enough to respect it. Many people fear themselves, and because they fear themselves, they fear anyone who represents an alternative to self-avoidance. Your growth is not loud, but it is visible. Your progress is not dramatic, but it is undeniable. And the mind of the unhealed cannot sit peacefully in the presence of proof. Proof forces comparison. Proof forces reflection. And reflection forces accountability. So rather than confront their dormant life, their unlived courage, their avoided evolution, they discuss you. It is easier. It is safer. It feels like participation without transformation. You've become an emotional placeholder for their discomfort. Not because you intended to, but because spiritual contrast exposes psychological avoidance. As you continue listening, release every emotional impulse. There is no need for anger, no need for defense. Try to listen like someone sitting at the edge of a quiet river, simply observing the water move, recognizing its direction, acknowledging its nature, and letting it pass. That is how we will move through this understanding. Slow, steady, inward. The first truth is this: nothing spoken behind your back has authority over your path. Words are symptoms, not realities. Projection is noise, not prophecy. Behind the back conversations are simply emotional ventilation. People managing their fear through interpretation. Their statements do not describe you. They describe the limits of their own nervous system. You do not need permission to be unchanged. You do not need approval to deepen your consciousness. Now we begin. Point 1. They say you've changed because growth invalidates their stagnation. Chosen one, the human brain organizes reality through patterns, and the nervous system experiences safety when those patterns remain consistent. When you were predictable, when your emotional availability was unlimited, when your self-worth was outsourced to approval, when your identity aligned with their expectations, they felt secure. Your compliance made you comfortable to handle. Your emotional openness made you exploitable. But when you began healing, when you stopped seeking validation, when you stopped tolerating emotional disrespect, when you no longer lived through other people's perceptions, you dismantled the equilibrium they once relied upon. They do not say, "You have grown." They say, "You have changed." This is not an observation. It is a complaint. It is the mind protesting the loss of control. In developmental psychology, we call this homeostatic resistance, the tendency for social systems to reject improvement because improvement requires adaptation. Your evolution forces others to confront their stagnation, their emotional laziness, and their refusal to expand. In private, they speak about you as if your maturation is a betrayal. They say you act differently. They say you behave strangely. They say you are not the person they knew. and they are correct. You are not. You outgrew the emotional framework they demanded you occupy. You became someone who no longer bends for belonging. This is why they whisper. Growth forces comparison. Comparison forces dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction forces self-examination. And most people would rather protect their ego than examine their soul. There is something terrifying about a person who proves change is possible, because it removes the excuses of those who refuse to try. Your transformation magnifies their paralysis, their avoidance, and their emotional immaturity. The whisper is not truly about you. It is a confession. It is the sound of a comfortable person watching their comfort collapse in your presence. Point 2. They claim you are distant because your peace is not accessible anymore. Chosen. 1. Emotional dependence is one of the most unaddressed addictions in the modern psyche. People become addicted to access. Access to your attention, your empathy, your energy, and your participation in their chaos. When you were emotionally available to everyone, they felt ownership of your presence. But when inner peace became your priority, when you stopped explaining yourself, when you stopped responding to emotional bait, when you stopped showing up to dysfunction, they felt deprived. The unhealed interpret boundaries as betrayal. They interpret silence as rejection. They interpret peace as abandonment. And because they live externally, regulated by noise, stimulation, and distraction, they cannot understand why a human being might retreat into silence for nourishment. Neuroscience shows that solitude engages the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for reflection, memory processing, and identity consolidation. Without solitude, identity fractures. Without solitude, emotions dominate. Without solitude, spiritual alignment is impossible. You did not become distant, you became regulated. You did not walk away from them. You walked toward yourself. Yet in private spaces, they speak of you as if you vanished with hostility. They tell stories of how you changed up, of how you stopped caring, of how you isolated yourself. They are not describing you. They are describing their discomfort when someone no longer serves as emotional anesthesia. They want your presence without honoring your boundaries. They want access without accountability. Peace confuses them because they cannot locate themselves without noise. Point 3. They suggest you are acting superior because confidence threatens insecurity. Chosen. 1. Quiet. Confidence is often pathologized by insecure minds. Not because it is arrogant, but because insecurity interprets neutrality as hierarchy. You are not acting superior. You have simply stopped performing inferiority. Think carefully. When you were uncertain, when you second-guessed yourself, when you required reassurance, when you apologized for existing, no one labeled you arrogant. Because insecurity does not threaten insecurity. The version of you that dimmed your light, over-explained your every move, and constantly sought permission, made other people feel safe, not because it was healthy, but because it kept them comfortable. But when you developed inner authority, when your decisions became self-directed, when your voice stabilized, when your choices aligned with purpose, your self-trust challenged their self-doubt. Your calm no exposed how often they have betrayed themselves with a fearful yes. Your silence in drama exposed their addiction to noise. The unhealed mind assumes that confidence must be directed at others, rather than anchored within self. They do not understand that spiritual authority is interior, not comparative. You are not placing yourself above them. You have simply stopped placing yourself beneath them. Social psychology calls this a status threat response. when an individual's self-assurance triggers status anxiety in observers who measure worth externally. To those trapped in comparison, your neutrality feels like competition. They cannot comprehend a hierarchy-free identity. They believe that if you do not bow, you must be standing over someone. They only understand two positions, above or below, dominant or submissive, worshipped or ignored. So when you stand in the middle, rooted, steady, and uninterested in playing their power games, they project their unresolved story onto you. True confidence does not dominate. It refuses to collapse. It is not loud, but it is immovable. It does not need to humiliate, but it will not participate in its own humiliation. Behind your back, they call this arrogance because arrogance is easier to accuse than introspection. It is easier to say, they think they're better than us, than to admit, I have never learned to believe in myself. Remember this, their words are not a mirror. They are a confession. Your task is not to shrink so they feel secure. Your task is to keep walking in your quiet, unwavering authority until those who are ready to heal realize that what they called arrogance was simply an invitation to finally meet themselves. Point 4. They question your intentions because clarity removes manipulation. Chosen one, when a person can no longer manipulate your emotional availability, they begin to manipulate narratives. This is a predictable psychological defense. In human social behavior, motives are rarely examined directly. Instead, people form assumptions that protect their self-interests. When you were uncertain, when you were persuadable, when your self-worth was dependent on external affirmation, others could shape your decisions, subtly, indirectly, and comfortably. But when you developed clarity, when your values sharpened, when your boundaries became visible, when you stopped negotiating your standards, they lost influence. Influence is a currency. When individuals lose that currency, they often respond with accusation. They question your motives, not because your motives are unclear, but because your clarity has severed their leverage. What they say behind your back is not a commentary on your character. It is a complaint about their loss of access. They say, he thinks he's too good, when what they mean is, he no longer seeks approval. They say, she doesn't need anyone, when what they mean is, she no longer needs validation. They say, he is acting strange, when what they mean is, he stopped responding to pressure. Psychological research uses the term to describe this phenomenon. When someone's sense of influence over another person disappears, their brain creates explanations to maintain emotional balance. They cannot admit that you have grown. They cannot admit that you no longer bend. They cannot admit that your path is guided internally now. So they replace admission with suspicion. Suspicion is safer than accountability. Accusation is easier than self-reflection. In spiritual terms, manipulation is the opposite of alignment. When you stepped into alignment, they stepped into confusion. And confusion expresses itself through stories. Point 5. They accuse you of isolation because solitude reveals their emptiness. Chosen one, solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is a sacred container where damaged narratives dissolve, emotional fatigue resets, and identity reorganizes. The spiritually asleep do not differentiate between the two. They believe proximity equals meaning. They believe constant interaction equals value. They believe attention equals love. But an awakened individual understands that solitude is oxygen, necessary, restorative, and clarifying. In psychological science, solitude activates emotional processing and trauma integration, Without intentional isolation, old conditioning never releases. Without distance, unhealthy emotional bonds remain intact. You withdrew not to disappear. You withdrew to recover. You step back not to punish others. You step back to witness yourself. You needed time to digest your past, to purify your emotional palate, and to restructure your nervous system. But individuals with no inner world experience silence as a threat. They depend on distraction to avoid themselves. They depend on constant social contact to prevent introspection. So when you retreat into the quiet, they take offense. They interpret your healing space as personal rejection. And because they cannot accept that you are choosing inner alignment, they invent narratives that preserve their ego. They say you cut everyone off. They say you ran away. They say you became strange. They are speaking from emotional deprivation, not observation. The truth is simple. When someone has never met themselves, they fear anyone who meets themselves regularly. They are not afraid of your solitude. They are afraid of what solitude made you see. Point 6. They rewrite the story of your pain because truth makes them responsible. Chosen one, there are people who witnessed your suffering and did nothing. Some minimized it, some ignored it, some benefited from it, and some were the cause of it. When a person has been present during another human's wound but offers no support, they must construct psychological distance to escape responsibility. Rewriting your story is the easiest method. They may say your pain was exaggerated. They may say your hardship was not that serious. They may claim you misinterpreted events. They may weaponize language to shrink accountability. This is not commentary. It is self-protection. It is cognitively easier to deny another person's suffering than to acknowledge personal absence. In social psychology, this is called cognitive dissonance reduction. When reality threatens one's self-image, the mind alters memory instead of identity. Your healing contradicts their narrative. Your survival exposes their irresponsibility. Your evolution reminds them that they offered nothing. And because they cannot apologize, they revise. But you do not need validation for your wounds. Your pain was real. Your transformation is evidence. Your scars are testimony. Behind your back, their revisionism is not about your story. It is about shielding their conscience. The universe does not require you to respond. Silence is judgment enough. And yet, chosen one, understand something deeper. Human beings protect their ego the way an injured animal protects an open wound. Accountability feels like exposure. An apology feels like surrender. Growth feels like admission. So instead of truth, they select denial. Instead of compassion, they choose avoidance. They will even gather allies to reinforce their version of events, because collective delusion is easier than personal responsibility. But every time you rise, you disrupt that delusion. Every improvement you make becomes a mirror they cannot face. Your peace is threatening because it reveals the chaos they tried to hide. Your maturity is uncomfortable because it highlights the immaturity they never resolved. Your strength is unsettling because it reminds them of the moment they chose weakness. Notice how often people distance themselves from the ones they failed. They avoid conversation. They avoid acknowledgement. They avoid history. The more powerful you become, the more they retreat, because your presence illuminates their neglect. But your story does not require their edits. Your progress does not need their endorsement. Healing is not a debate. It is a fact. Broken bones that mend become stronger at the fracture point, not because of approval, but because of biological truth. Your emotional bones have done the same. You owe no rebuttal, no clarification, and no emotional labor. Let their silence speak. Let their avoidance testify. The universe witnessed what they ignored, and the universe, in its perfect accounting, does not forget. Point 7. They fear your next level because it confirms what they could have been. Chosen one, the most unsettling conversations about you do not concern your past. They concern your trajectory. Human beings experience upward comparison anxiety, a discomfort triggered when someone close to them progresses toward a reality they never attempted. They are not threatened by who you were. They are threatened by who you are becoming. Growth requires decision. Healing requires confrontation. Evolution requires consistency. Many people avoid all three. So when someone close elevates, it disrupts emotional equilibrium. They fear your future because it highlights their forfeited potential. They fear your confidence because it challenges their excuses. They fear your discipline because it discredits their passivity. And so they whisper, not because they want to destroy you, but because they cannot confront themselves. The terrifying thing you represent is possibility. Possibility forces discomfort. Discomfort forces change, and change forces identity reconstruction. Your existence proves that transformation was always available. That truth is unbearable for those who chose stagnation. Now understand this final clarity. Chosen one, their whispering is not power. Their confusion is not prophecy. Their speculation is not truth. You owe no emotional labor to people who speak in shadows. Human speech does not alter divine assignment. Private conversations do not obstruct purpose. Gossip is wind. Noise is wind. Opinion is wind. And wind does not move a mountain. You are not here to perform humility. You are not here to convince doubters. You are not here to translate your calling. You are here to walk it, quiet, steady, responsible, without applause, without defense, without counterattack. Behind your back is still behind you. Growth does not reverse direction. Let them talk in the places you have already outgrown. Let them debate in emotional rooms you no longer occupy. You are not returning to explain transcendence to the untransformed. Growth is not a group decision. Healing is not a conference vote. Destiny is not a committee. What is ahead is sacred. What is behind is irrelevant. Walk forward, chosen one. Their words cannot follow you into elevation.